We're continuing to learn the Chatzar Yosef, the depths of the Gemara Masechet Gittin. Last week we spoke about a lot of deep concepts, good reviews in the video. Hopefully we'll do even better now. What we are doing now, section 3. That's right. I want to skip section 2. It's a little bit tedious. It's not really, like I said, for a video kind of thing. People won't really enjoy it that way. It's very tedious stuff regarding a very small detail that we speak about for like two, 3 pages. But section 3, however, is very, very good. So let's go from there. Yeah. We did section 1. It's in the video. Yeah. So you guys can look at that. Yeah, it's in the video. I had to do it that way. Okay. So section 2, I'm going to skip also. We're going to go to section 3. We can study that on our own time. Section 3 of the story, just for completion's sake, I'm going to read the Gemara in section 2 only, and then we're going to skip straight to page 130 and learn about the Gemara there. So the story of Titus continues as follows. The Gemara continues there in Gittin and says the following. What else did Titus do? He took the parochet, the same parochet that he stabbed, the special curtain, and he made it like a, it says over here, the Gemara, he made it like a gragotani. What's a gragotani? Rashi explains this is like a large basket, a shape of a large basket through which wine would be poured into this basket in order to filter it, like a wicker basket. So he made the parochet into that shape of a basket, and he brought all the sacred vessels of the temple and placed them within it. That's how he carried it. And he then put them on a ship to go back and be glorified in his city in Rome. As it is stated, there's a pasuk that says, and so I saw the wicked buried, and they came to their rest. And they would go from the holy place, and they would be forgotten in the city which they did so. It's from pasuk Kohelet. The Gemara makes it Rasha, says don't read the word kevurim, buried. Rather, you should read it as kevutzim, a certain underlying meaning. Kevutzim means gathered, and don't read it as vayishtakehu, which means they were forgotten. Rather, read it as vayishtabechu. To change the chaf to a bet, you get vayishtabechu. Chaf and bet are very similar letters; they're very similarly shaped. And vayishtabechu means that they were glorified instead of they were forgotten. There are those who say that this pasuk is referring to the items that were actually buried. That even items that have been buried were revealed to them, which means buried items that were buried in the temple grounds was revealed for the Romans to take back. In other words, then the next part of the story is what I want to focus on. Next part of the story, of course, the second temple was just destroyed. Titus wins the war, and he goes back to Rome. Look what it says here. We're on page 130 now. It's a very interesting concept. The Gemara says there, as Titus was traveling at sea with a ship full of goods that he got from the Beit HaMikdash, a storm stood upon him to drown him in the ocean. Big storm came. Titus said, it seems to me that the God of the Jews only has power by water. What are you saying? Paro came and he drowned him in the water. Right? Sisera came. Sisera. Who is Sisera? The story in the book of Shoftim, Judges, which we'll speak about. We'll give you the background. But Sisera was also an enemy of the Jews. He was fighting a war against the Jewish people at that time. And what happened to him also? And God came and drowned him in water as well. Sisera also was killed by water. Even now, Titus is saying, he stands against me to drown me in the water. If he truly is mighty, this God of the Jews really has power, let him go up on dry land and make war with me there. That's what Titus says. Then the Gemara says a heavenly voice issued forth from heaven at that moment, and it said to him, "Wicked one, Rasha, son of a wicked one, son of a Rasha, son of the son of Esav the wicked." Meaning your whole family is tainted with wickedness, God said. I have a beriakala, a lowly creature. This is the Gemara speaking about the situation. I have a beriakala. God says, this heavenly voice is saying, I have a small creation, lowly creature in my world, and its name is a yatush. What's a yatush? It's commonly used today to refer to a mosquito. But we translate it here as a gnat, G-N-A-T, a small, blood-sucking pest, if you will. The Gemara interjects now and it says, why is it called Briyakala? Why is it called this term, lowly creature? Says the Gemara, the ma'alna itla umfakna let la. This is a slight typo. It should say litla. Because it has an entrance, but it does not have an exit. This gnat, this mosquito, has an entrance but doesn't have an exit. That's why it's called a lowly creature. What do you mean? Oh, so that's going to be a major question that we have to refer to, that we have to answer. You'll see. The Gemara says further, the Gemara resumes the story and it says that the heavenly voice continued to speak and it said, go up on dry land and make war with it. Which means God is saying to Titus, you want to fight me? Come on dry land and fight my mosquito. See if you could win. He went up on dry land. The storm stopped. He made it to shore. Gets off the boat, and what happens? A gnat came and entered his nose. And it picked at his brain for 7 years. The story continues, but we're going to stop here in the story in order to analyze and break down this portion. But we see the mosquito is not done with. So now the Rashi says over here. Hold on a second. Any notes I want to say here? Right. Okay. So I want to read note 1 after the first sentence there. Right? The heavenly voice called Titus the son of the wicked Esav. The Mahashar writes that the heavenly voice mentioned Esav because there was a tradition amongst the Goyim, the Gentiles, that the descendants of Esav, namely Rome, would destroy the second temple. They had a rumor or a tradition that's what would happen. Okay. So now we mentioned Sisera, right? When Titus was complaining to God, he said, "Oh, Sisera came. You also had to use water to beat him. All you can do is water." So what's the story of Sisera? We gave you a nice summary in note number 2. Let's explain this from Shofatim, the book of Judges, chapter 5:21. Sisera was a Canaanite general, right? Canaani, he was one of the idol-worshiping nations of Canaan. He's from there, and they oppressed the Jews of Israel for a time of 20 years between the time of Yehoshua and the building of the first temple. That's the time period after Yehoshua came and led the Jewish people into the land, and they defeated all the Canaanim, or most of them, I should say, and they took the land and they distributed the land. From that time until the first temple was built, which was David Melech's time and Shlomo Melech's time, until then there was no kings in Israel. Rather, Israel was ruled by judges, shoftim. They were prophets, and they were very powerful diplomatic leaders. During that time, Sisera and his army came against the Jews. He and his army, right, they were defeated by Barak. Who's Barak? Barak, son of Avinoam. Not Barack Obama. Barak, the son of Avinoam, who was Jewish. He was the army general of the Jews at that time. Barak, the son of Avinoam. Avinoam, yeah. So they defeated Sisera as commanded by Devorah, the prophetess. The leader of the Jewish people at that time was a woman, Devorah. She was a prophetess. She was a judge. And while Sisera himself, however, he was famously killed by a woman named Yael. in this story, in this war. If you want to see more, look Shoftim, Judges, chapters 4 and 5. What happened exactly? How she killed him? Sisera was running away from the Jewish army because they were being helped greatly by God at that moment. And Yael drew him into her tent. She was a married woman, and she's the simple verses there says that she gave him a lot of milk to drink to tire him out. But if you look at the verses and the words there, it's quite obvious, and all the commentaries say that she seduced him to tire him out several times, and then he fell asleep, right? And then she took a peg and hammered it through his head to kill him. Why else would you take a peg? He was the enemy, the leader of the enemy army against the Jews. She's a woman, and he's an army general, and she had to seduce him and tire him out. And then she did that. Oh, why should she kill him that way specifically? Because it was a tent, I guess. The way they used to pitch their tents was they used to have these special hammers and pegs to knock in the ends, the edges of the curtain, right? That's how you pitch a tent. That's what she had on her. She's not a warrior. That's what she had handy at the moment. Okay? So the note continues. After the victory, Devorah, who is the leader of the Jewish people, she sings a special song. And that song is the subject of Shoftim 5, chapter 5, where she mentions that Sisera's men were swept away by the brook Kishon. Brook is like a very small body of water, stream of water. Okay, not a river, much smaller than that. But something miraculously happened with that water, which defeated Sisera's army. The Metzudat David, which is a commentary, he writes over there that the battle took place on the bank of the brook Kishon, and the water miraculously surged out and took down Sisera's men. Ralbag over there, another commentary on the Tanakh, he writes that the miracle was that the water was usually shallow, that water. Very shallow, a brook. That's what you call a brook. It's not a very deep body of water. But as Sisera's men passed through it to go to battle with the Jews, the water surged and drowned them. So it became unusually, miraculously deep and powerful. And it drowned them. It remained calm and shallow, however, when the Jews passed through it in pursuit of the enemy. So for the Jews, like in Egypt, for the Jews it was good, for the non-Jews it was bad. Radak, another commentary, he writes that Sisera's chariots, for which he was praised, toppled in the brook and drowned their drivers, tantamount to what happened to the Egyptian chariots at the splitting of the sea when the Jews left Egypt. Right? Good. That's the story of Sisera, and that's what Titus was referring to, complaining to God, saying, the only way you can beat me is with water. Right? That's what he said. What he said. So Rashi says over here now, the term Ruach Se'ara used in our Gemara means a stormy wind. Sisera, Kishon Brook, we said that already. Now we said that the mosquito is called the Bria Kala, a lowly creature. Why? Because it has an entrance and no exit. Rashi explains, entrance means it has a mouth for food to enter, but exit means it has no exit for excretion. It cannot excrete, apparently, according to how Rashi explains our Gemara. Now, we have to ask, I'm sure they have some sort of waste system. Maybe, I'm not sure exactly how. It could be through air. It could be through moisture. Yeah. But I would assume it has some sort of, rectal-like structure. But it's very tiny. Excrete, yes. Because metabolism of any organism creates waste products automatically. Okay? So now, Sha'ar Chatzar, page 131. We have to ask some important questions here. Why did Titus assume that it was the God of the Jews who brought the storm, if in the previous section of the Gemara says that he thought he killed himself? Right? We spoke in the previous lecture that he thought he had killed the God of the Jews, which is absurd. That's what he thought. If that's the case. Why is he saying now, it's the God of the Jews doing this in the ocean? Doesn't make sense. Why does Hashem often use water to destroy his enemies? We have to consider what Titus said. Listen, Apparently, Titus was historically knowledgeable to a degree, and he knew that the Jews' enemies were often beaten by water. The question was why? Why does God so often use water? Okay, but there's so many ways you can defeat an enemy, so many different miracles that God can ordain to defeat an enemy. Why specifically does he use water? What is it about water that we need to know? The flood, exactly, of Noah. More incidents of water. Well, we mentioned Noah, Egypt, Sisera. That's what comes to mind right now. There may be more. That's what comes to mind. Oh, Yonah to an extent. Yonah, but he's not an enemy. He was a prophet. He was a Jewish prophet. So. Why did he say that? What are you saying? He has used fire as well, like in Egypt. So I guess what he's pointing out is specifically when God defeats the enemy leader, it's with water. Like Paro in the Yam Suf was with water. Sisera was with, even Sisera wasn't with water. That's another question we're going to ask. Sisera, his men were killed with water. Sisera himself was killed by Yael. So yeah, the woman always. And the Gemara says something about cow's milk. What do you mean? No, the verses say that she fed him milk. Let's see. Next question. Why did God seemingly acquiesce to Titus's intimidation? Think about that for a second. Right? Who cares how he killed Titus? Whether with water or any other means. The bottom line is that Titus would have been defeated, right? If God wanted to drown that ship and destroy Titus and his people, which he sort of, hinted that he was about to do because he brought a strong wind, a strong storm, and so who cares how he beat him? Bottom line is he beat him. But it seems like the problem is it seems like Titus said, "Oh, you can't do that. It's breaking the rules." And God said, "Okay." That's cheating. That's cheating or something.
You always do that.
Yeah, you always do that. Right. So let's comment what I say here.
You're asking the questions. Why did God
acquiesce? Yes.
I love the way that we use the same word.
Well, it's right here in front of the book. Yes.
I didn't even look at it.
Yes, the word aqua is in acquiesce.
Acquiesce, aqua, water.
Okay, so look. Furthermore, Titus's argument in this whole thing is very foolish and childish. Think about what he said. At the end of the day, what matters is who wins and who loses, correct? If you have a competition, if you have a sport, you have a game, bottom line is, as long as everyone's playing by the rules, the only thing that matters is who wins at the end and who loses. So, and if one competitor has a special skill or attribute that he often uses to win, correct? Such as God using water, then more power to him. Is there some unspoken rule that one is not allowed to use his strengths to defeat his opponent in a fight to the death? It's like saying, lehavdil. If you have a famous boxer who's world renowned, he uses his hands very well, and he gets in a fight with somebody, and it's like very serious, and it's about to go to the death. Another guy says, okay, if we're gonna do this, you can't use your hands. You can't punch. Only legs and a whole. What do you mean? Who cares? Bottom line is right now, this is a life or death situation. I'm gonna do whatever I need to do to win. Yeah, you can't do that. It's like some of us are sports fans. It's like saying, Steph Curry, lehavdil, he's one of the greatest shooters ever. You can play him, but you can't shoot any threes, right? You can't shoot any threes. Only free throws and layups. You understand? What do you mean? He's good at that. It's legal. He can beat you with it. Let him do it. So, lehavdil, same kind of idea over here. So let's say God has a power with water. Well, he has power with everything. But Titus understood that God of the Jews only has power with water. So he says, "Oh, you can't use water to beat me. Beat me in the land." You mean I can't use water? Who cares? Why can't I use water?
Maybe he was thinking he could only kill using water.
Yes, that's what he said.
Not that he only has power over water.
Same kind of idea. His strength was water. And Titus is saying, "Oh, you can't use that. Why not? Why not? What's the problem?" You came in the middle. Show him, Danny.
He didn't say you can't use it. He said, like, prove to me that you're more than just water.
But why should God listen at that point? Why should God say, okay, fine. Like, why didn't you just drown him right there? Bring a tidal wave and call it a day.
It's no fun.
Oh, so God's in it for fun? God's in it for fun? Okay, that's our question.
In those days, the way they used to live
Yeah.
house, and then
So let him read it. So it says further over here, how did God seemingly give in to this reverse psychology of the awful Titus, the likes of something a child would say? This argument is a childish argument, and God plays along. Okay, we have to figure that out. Why is that so? The next question here, we have a few questions. There's a lot of questions. Next question. Also, there seems to be some technical, historical inaccuracies with what Titus said. Paro and Sisera did not actually drown by water. They didn't actually drown by water. Paro's chariots indeed drowned in the Red Sea, as it says straight out in the Pesukim. It says the horse and the chariot drowned in the sea, but it didn't say Paro. He himself was not killed, according to one famous midrash. And later on in life, he ended up becoming the king of Nineveh, another city. And he made Teshuvah, right? The famous story of Yonah. And upon the prophet Yonah's warning that Nineveh was to be judged for their wrongdoing, Paro, the same Paro, according to this midrash, he ordered that the entire city fast for 2 days, and he succeeded in repenting and gaining favor for his city in the eyes of heaven and saving his city. So Paro didn't die by water. He wasn't drowned. So what is Titus saying? He just didn't know? Let's see. Similarly, Sisera's men indeed were drowned by the Kishon brook. His men, like we said, his soldiers. But he himself was killed by Yael, who first lulled him to sleep by giving him milk to drink, and then she drove a peg through his temple, not the temple, this part of the head, while he was asleep. Yeah. So, although the Metzudat David, he says in Shoftim over there that it happened through Hashem's supervision, that sister was allowed to be killed by this woman. Nevertheless, it wasn't by water. That's my point. Thus, why does Titus say that both Pharaoh and Sisera were drowned by water if they technically were not? Next question. What is our Gemara trying to say when it calls the gnat, this mosquito, a briya kala, a lowly creature? Technically, the word kala, not chatan v'kala, that's with a kaf, or chaf. This is kala with a kuf, which means light. Light versus heavy. Right? It's more translated. It's more like better translated as light, in the sense of lightweight. And calling a creature that has an entrance but no exit, right? According to how Rashi explained it, it would seem anything but lightweight, since its ingested material would simply pile up inside it, making it heavier and heavier. So, technically, again, I'm asking on why is Gemara using this term to describe it, and Rashi says, it means it can't excrete. Well, if it can't excrete, it will be heavy. If a person is constipated for a long time, he's heavy.
No matter how much I eat, I'll never be heavy.
What do you mean?
If I eat, there's only so much I can
If the other end is stopped up and you can't get your waste out,
What is he going to get? Half a pound?
Yeah.
What is a mosquito going to get?
Am
Half
I
a
going to
pound?
weigh 500 pounds after I eat?
no, not 500, but my point is the term doesn't fit. The term doesn't fit is my point. We could use a different term. So how are we to understand this? What is the depth of the fact that it has an entrance and has no exit? What does that mean to us? Last question, last but not least. Why did this gnat specifically enter his nose? Why did it go inside Titus's head through his nose? And why did it pick at his brain for 7 years? No more, no less. Why that detail? Why 7 years? Why not 6.5? Why not 17 years? What's 7? Therefore? Okay, so that is the questions section. We have about 10 minutes. Let's get started with some of the commentaries here. Again, for the future lectures in this new series, always refer back to this lecture for the questions, because I'm not going to repeat the questions every lecture. All the questions were laid out right there, and that's going to be the goal for the rest of these few lectures in this series, to answer all those questions with God's help. Amudei Chatzar, page 132. Let's start with the first commentary called the Geresh Yerachim. Geresh Yerachim is a very little known book about the. It's a commentary on the Gemara Masechet Gittin. He says the following here. He says Titus was of the theological opinion, right? His background is he's a pagan, idol worshiper. He's from Rome. He was of the opinion that pagan deities had no power over the seas. Therefore, he said that the God of the Jews must be behind the storm at sea, since there was no other pagan deity to stop him. This is my very important, important question that I also bring up later on in Chatzar Yosef. That this is just very hard to believe, because hard to take this at face value, because we know from Greek mythology, Roman mythology, they always had a god of the sea. Poseidon is the famous example in Greek mythology. The Romans adopted a lot of that into their mythology. So the Geresh Yerachim is saying that they had no god of the water, god of the sea, and therefore it was left to the God of the Jews. And that's why he said, he must be bringing the storm. That's what he says. Let's see what he says. The reason Hashem used the gnat to punish Titus is because Titus claimed that Hashem only has power with water. So he sent the gnat, the mosquito, which has a very limited composition of water, in the sense that it does not excrete, and instead heats and digests all that it takes in. Right? So one of the methods of excretion is urination. For that, water, liquid is required. Correct? So therefore this gnat, which the Gemara says had no method of excretion, i.e. no urination, so it's dry, it's no water in it, it's the driest of the dry creation. And this way Hashem proved that he has power beyond just water. So you use the super dry creation to defeat Titus. As we'll see, he does defeat Titus. Titus suffers a terrible fate, as we'll see in the next section, what happens with this mosquito. Would a virus be better? What do you mean? Yeah, but they didn't have microscopes. They weren't able to identify bacteria. Viruses are microscopic. Yeah. Perhaps. But they wouldn't know, right? They wouldn't be able to tell. They wouldn't be able to point it out and teach it. Okay. It's Yosef. He said, it's not me, it's a different commentary. Yes. Yes. 7 years.
He must have been sick the entire 7 years.
Yeah, he suffered for 7 years. He suffered. And then he died, as we'll see. Says the Etz Yosef, the unusual language of our Gemara when it says a storm stood upon Titus, right? The actual Hebrew would be Amad alav nachshol shebayam. Amad alav, it stood upon him. It's a weird way to describe a storm coming. So why is it like that? It seems to indicate, says the Etz Yosef, that the storm only affected his boat. It stood upon him, literally, and only him. Whereas the neighboring boats were completely unaffected. Only Titus' boat. Which made Titus realize that the God of the Jews must have been behind it. Something fishy was going on, no pun intended. The reason why water so often topples those that rebel against Hashem. We ask this question: why does God use water to defeat the enemies of the Jews so often, such as Paro and Sisera and now Titus? Is because, says the Etz Yosef, waters are hasty to fulfill the will of their Creator. As it is written regarding waters, it says in Tehillim, they ascend mountains, they descend to valleys, to the special place you founded for them. Meaning they are a very loyal soldier of God, this creation of water. Oh, there you go. Sotah is to have water, exactly. So water fulfills Hashem's will by default, even without being commanded. It's always doing God's will automatically. Yeah. Water is amazing, is an amazing thing, especially scientists, they're baffled by water. Physicists, chemists, because it breaks all the rules of chemistry and physics. Water. It's an amazing substance. So yeah, like siphoning. You ever heard of siphoning water? It goes against gravity. You know how a siphon works? No. A siphon. When you siphon water, you can have a water stream going this way, right? But you could, let's say the water's going this way, but you have a farm over here on the side of it, and you want to get the water here to irrigate your farm. So you could take a tube, suck on one end of the tube, creating a suction, and put the other end in the water, release your mouth from it or whatever suction you're using, and then even though the water's going this way, it'll automatically, because of the suction, start going against gravity, upwards and over. Yes, pressure, of course, all these things are involved. By itself, I'm not sure. Maybe there's some rivers that flow upstream. There are, like on mountains that flow upstream. Water, it's weird. It's a weird thing. It's amazing. It's a miraculous thing. It breaks all the rules. Even like, there's an amazing, here's a question. How come in the winter all the water doesn't freeze? All the oceans, right?
I heard in the winter the water is warmer.
For example, Antarctica. You're right. The salt could change the freezing temperature, but not. It would change it, but it still would have freezing temperature. And in Antarctica, where it's negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit, it would reach it. Why doesn't it freeze? Because it's an amazing thing. As it freezes, I could be wrong. I'm not 100%. I have to double check. But when it reaches 4 degrees Celsius, because 0 degrees Celsius is freezing, which is 32. Once it reaches 4 degrees Celsius, the water gets denser and it moves to the bottom. And then the other water flows to the top. So therefore, it never has a chance to fully freeze because it's constantly cycling like this. Amazing thing. That's one of many things about water. Look it up. Yeah, listen, it's good to be educated about God's world. Be amazed by it. Huh? The Midrash speaks about a sea monster. It's called Leviathan. Even in English, it's called Leviathan. It's called God's pet. God plays with it. There's a famous Midrash in Masechet Sukkot also says, yeah, it's like a huge the Loch Ness monster. A lot of different names for this huge sea monster. But it says that in the future, all the tzaddikim are going to sit in a sukkah, kosher sukkah, covered with the skin, the hide of the Leviathan. Very deep concept. Apparently, it plays now. There's a pasuk that we say every month on the Tehillim of Rosh Chodesh, which we just finished, right? It's called Baruch Nafshi. In that Baruch Nafshi, there's a pasuk that says, God, you created the Leviathan to play with it. You created it to play with it. It says a pasuk like that. What that means, whole other lecture. But there is a concept. Yes, there was 2 of them. One died. Yes, you're right. It's very deep stuff. You know, there's no way to say it's a fairy tale too. Why? Because we know less about the surface of the Earth underwater than we do about the surface of Mars. Yeah, it's not endless. Well, we don't know, honest. No one's ever been there, so no one can tell you. They can conjecture that it's supposed to be this deep, but they find new things there all the time. But not on the whole surface of the ocean. Certain places here, there.
Because the further down you go, the more pressure it's going to break anything.
Exactly. So again, we know less about the surface of the bottom surface of the ocean than we do about the surface of Mars.
No less about the ocean than about space.
Pretty much. It's amazing.
And yet, the Torah will still never proven wrong about the things and scale.
So look what it says over here. Water fulfills God's will by default. It does so because of its fervor, its passion for honoring Hashem. So as soon as it saw Titus traveling upon it, it reacted with the storm automatically. That's how Yosef explains it. The gnat is called a lowly creature, b'riyakala, not because of its small size, since there's even smaller creatures than it that could have been used, like lice. Rather, it's called lowly because of its inability to excrete waste. That's what, like our Gemara said. I want to finish this paragraph and then yes. The reason Hashem used a gnat to punish Titus was because just as the gnat has an entrance but no exit, right? As the Gemara said, so too Titus would enter Rome, receiving great honor for the military victory over the Jews, but he would eventually exit the city in disgrace from the damage the gnat would do to him. So it would kill him eventually. So also Titus would have a great entrance, but he wouldn't have a great exit. Also to him at the gnat itself would enter his head and never exit. Just like it itself has an entrance. Like that's the hint. Yes.
You said the storm was coming and it's above him. When we say power of water, do we mean like for weather and everything, or just for sea?
Well, it's all connected because rain is water, the ocean is water.
Yeah.
Climate is very strongly affected by water. Yes, there's also wind involved. I agree. There's lightning. The water is a major factor, and that's where he was on. He was on a boat. So
Why couldn't the water knock him over?
it was about.
Why are we saying that it's storm above him? It's still over him.
Well, no waves don't come unless you have a storm system. You need a storm system. So for the water to just moving miraculously, again, even miracles have to be clothed within the natural setting. So for the water itself on a bright sunny day, to start big waves, then that would be too much. That would not be within the normal order of how God created it. It needs to be clouds, it needs to be a storm. Yeah.
The Rambam's answer to why he didn't kill him with the water right away is because maybe he wanted to do nothing for 7 years to give him time to do Shuvah.
It's all about the Shuvah. So it says our very famous, can I say her name? The Rambatz, that's his code name. He says that his answer for why God killed him with the gnat and not just with the water is because he wanted to give Titus a chance to make the Shuvah, give him 7 years to make the Shuvah. I'll accept that answer. It's one valid answer. We find that plenty of times where God gives, even the most wicked, he gives him opportunities to make the Shuvah. Yes. Certain situations, yes. By Paro, and the Rambam says it famously, but again, it's a whole other topic on its own. Bezat Hashem, next week we'll continue to 9:30. We're going to continue with the commentaries here, and we'll go deeper. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.